like to call this meeting to order, the Mayor and Board of Commissioners for May the 9th, 2023. Will you rise with me? Oh, excuse me. Can I get the roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Braun?
Here.
Commissioner Kleiner?
Here.
Commissioner Pearson?
Here.
Commissioner Warnick?
Here.
Let the record show you do have a quorum.
Will you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will you bow your heads with me for a brief prayer? Father God, I ask that you watch over our citizens, Lord. I ask that you watch over our first responders and our military. Be with us as we're here. Be with the elected body and their families, Lord, and be with all of our citizens. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. In addition to our regular town meeting, we are also here tonight to hold a public hearing of the Mayor and Board of Commissioners in order to discuss and receive public comment on Ordinance 2023-08, which is intended to change the zoning classification for 8 Cooper Avenue. The staff will provide an overview for everyone present, and it will serve as the formal presentation for the purpose of the public hearing. As a general rule, public comment is limited to three minutes per person. We would ask that if you have the same concerns or a specific matter as someone that spoke before you, to summarize your thoughts to make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard. The board will take action on the ordinance at the regular town meeting to follow after the public hearing. Can I get a motion to suspend the town meeting?
Make a motion to suspend the town meeting.
So moved, or second?
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Can I get a motion to open the public hearing?
A motion to open the public hearing.
Second?
It's been in favor?
Aye.
We are now,
This is, we're revisiting ordinance number 2023-03, which was distributed previously in regards to changing the zoning designation of 8 Cooper Avenue. Let me first show you that as required by law, we did advertise a notice of this public hearing, as you can see on the screen. It did appear on April 19th and April 26th, which meets the requirement for the number of days between the last advertisement and the actual public hearing. We went over this ordinance at the last meeting. The standard boilerplate language, I'm going to pass through that. It's just outlining the law that enables us to change the zoning in regards to the state law, why we are changing the zoning, which is basically to be consistent with the town's comprehensive plan, and to the Planning Commission, as required by law, met on Thursday, April 27th, 2023, to review this proposed ordinance, and they voted to recommend approval of this ordinance unanimously. We are holding a public hearing tonight on May 9th to receive public input and comment. Scrolling down towards the end of the document here gives you an outline of exactly what is taking place. So 8 Cooper Avenue is located at the corner of Crothers and Cooper, and it's the previous home of Goody's Appliances, and prior to that, for some people that have lived in the town for a long time, it was the home of the Southern States Corporation, and that's why you can see the grain mill still attached to the end of the building. So what you're looking at here is a map that shows 8 Cooper Avenue. Its tax map is 10B, the parcel is 94, the tax account is 060233975, and it's 1.04 acres. The current use of the property is a vacant warehouse and storefront. The existing zoning is light industrial use. The current zoning of LI could promote future occupancies that could cause less than desirable operations and land use in close proximity to residential neighborhoods. Although the previous occupancy of the property was a non-conforming use, any attempts to continue this type of use in the current LI district would not be permitted under new ownership unless a special exception were approved. It is important to note that most of the other non-residential properties along West Main Street are currently zoned limited commercial LC and are operating in that manner, with 8 Cooper Avenue being one of the outliers. The town's comprehensive plan recommends it where a range of light commercial, central commercial, and/or light industrial land uses abut, such as along East and West Main Street and Cooper Avenue, the town should consider adjusting the zoning designation of the various parcels into a single zone to create a district or node. Adjusting the zoning of 8 Cooper Avenue from LI to LC will support the assembly of similar type uses in the same general area. The change of zoning will help protect the area from the more intensive LI zoning uses, but still allow the types of businesses and more practical use of the land to create a more compatible, harmonious, and coordinated flow of zoning along Main Street and portions of side streets that are part of the commercial application in this area. So again, going back to the image, you can see there's a lot of residential up on the top side here, and just past the Armstrong Maintenance Building, there's a lot of residential. So the way this zoning is right now is if somebody, the only use that's permitted in there is light industrial. And to give you an example, light industrial would be something that would produce odors, noise, just the kind of things that you wouldn't really want to have right smack in the middle of your residential neighborhood. We did, under our last comprehensive plan, phase 1 rezoning, we did have this property listed previously to be rezoned as we are doing tonight, but the previous property owner petitioned the town and asked that we not change the zoning. That previous property owner sold it to a new individual. You have, I believe you have the applications there of the gentleman, the LLC, and they recognize that putting light industrial in there is not the best use of that building. So they are in the process of looking to renovate this building to put a combination of retail spaces, a business and retail spaces in there. So at the end of the day, it's a much better use of this property. If we did not change the zoning on this, the property owner who owns it now, forming use reads, you can't take one retail and then put another type of business in there later on without getting another special exception. So it could end up being very costly for the property owner to use the property in a manner that honestly works better as a limited commercial. So that's basically the summary of the zoning change and the reasons for the zoning change.
Public comment? Would anyone like to speak this evening? All right. Can I get a motion to approve ordinance 2020?
No, what you would just deliberate and comment on it, close this meeting, and then if you want to take action on it, you would do it at the regular meeting.
Does anyone have any discussion? All right. Can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Make a motion.
Did you want to get comments from your attorney?
You don't get anything from me if there's no questions. This is in order and along the lines of what you did last year.
Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We have closed the public hearing. Can I get a motion to open a town meeting?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
We are now in a town meeting. All right, town administrator, it says, did you already do the staff reading? Is that correct?
Well, you have the consent agenda. Approval of the 4/13/23 town meeting video summary.
All right, you all have that. Can I get a motion to approve that?
Motion.
Consent agenda.
Yes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Is there any discussion? It all looks in order to me. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. All right. Ordinance, this is ordinance 2023-03. Can I get a motion to approve?
I make a motion, we approve ordinance 2023-038 Cooper rezoning classification.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes. Thank you, Town Administrator. Town Administrator, under new business, Resolution 2023-04, do you have that?
Yes, I do. So what you have before you is Resolution 2023-04 titled Police Department Vehicle Equipment and Leasing. As you're familiar with in the past, we typically do not, buy in cash necessarily vehicles. We lease them over a period of time. The company that we routinely use, we have a good working relationship with them, but it is required that the elected body pass a resolution basically authorizing this leasing. This is something that you've probably done maybe 6 or 7 times in the last 8 years. So basically what you have is a resolution in front of you. If you would like to entertain this, I'll read the salient points of this resolution.
Go ahead, I make a motion that you read the resolution 2023-04.
Okay, so I'll skip all the boilerplate. You're very familiar with it. This is basically just the enabling language that gives you the authority to do what you're doing. And I'll jump down to the fourth whereas. The mayor and commissioners have determined that a true and very real need exists for the acquisition of 2 new police vehicles consisting of a Chevy Tahoe, Ford Interceptor, and ancillary lights and communication equipment for the police department at a cost not to exceed $107,067.98. Whereas the mayor and commissioners, after thorough research and investigation, has determined that leasing these vehicles and equipment with the option to own at some point is consistent with the town's past practices and provides the best financial benefit to the town. Whereas to secure this leasing, the leasing company has requested that a formal resolution be adopted detailing this initiative. Therefore, let it be resolved that the mayor and commissioners hereby approve the entering into a contract with the leasing company and hereby designate and authorize the town administrator, Calvin A. Bonenberger Jr., to execute and deliver the contract on the town's behalf with such changes thereto as deemed appropriate and related documents, including any escrow agreement necessary to the consummation of the transaction contemplated by the contract. And be it further resolved that the mayor and commissioners of the town of Rising Sun pass, approved, and adopted this resolution on this 9th day of May 2023.
I make a motion, we adopt resolution 2023-04, the police department vehicle equipment and leasing, as read.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Resolution 2023-04 passes. Ordinance 2023-04, subdivision code intro and definitions. Town Administrator, can you read that for me?
Yes, so what you have before you is in ordinance number 2023-04, an ordinance of the town of Rising Sun, Cecil County, Maryland, amending the general laws of the town of Rising Sun by amending and adding language to chapter 11 titled Rising Sun Subdivision Regulations for the purposes of modifying and amending Articles 1 and 2 of the town's subdivision regulations regarding introduction of the code and definitions, and to repeal any and all other ordinances and parts of the ordinances in conflict therewith. In summary, this is all part of a process that we've been painfully working on for several years now, and this has to do with If you recall, back in the early 2000s, the town went into a sewer and water moratorium, which basically froze all new development in the town of Rising Sun from that point forward. And there were various projects in the town, one being the Knutson property, the Stevens Preserve property, Maple Heights, among others, that had to suspend development while the town was attempting to sort out the reason for the sewer and water moratorium, which basically was a lack of water quantity and a lack of suitable and proper treatment of wastewater. Fast forward to 2019, 18, I believe it was, the town lifted the sewer and water moratorium, having been successful in solving the town's water and sewer issues. And although these, the original owners of those developments that I talk about, had spoken about, have changed, they had been sold to other entities that are moving forward with land development efforts. It's no secret, especially for some members of this board, that the town had a very difficult time in the past with the way land development approvals were secured. There was a lot of, the fox guarding the hen house, so to speak, with previous town attorneys and different folks sort of advocating for developers more than advocating for the town and the citizens of the town. And so in order to protect the town, we have amended our comprehensive plan, did a lot of work there, have amended various other code sections, with the remaining code sections being the subdivision regulations. So what this, and I'm gonna be breaking this effort to update our subdivision code into smaller pieces, basically so that the baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater. If there's an issue with some of the things we are proposing, we've got to get moving on some of this stuff, because we are about to start receiving development applications, and it gets really messy if you try to change these regulations once people are in the queue, so to speak. So this first ordinance is going to be changing Article 1 and 2. Article 1 basically is just an introduction to the subdivision code, and there's a couple things we wanted to clean up to make it more consistent with our codes that we have amended, sort of keep the pattern and the structure the same. And then Article 2 is the definitions. What I'd like to do is skip through all the boilerplate again. This is all enabling language from the state that tells you that you have the authority to make changes to your subdivision code. It also, the law also stipulates that any changes to the subdivision code have to be reviewed by the planning commission ahead of time, and then recommendations made to this body. So what that means is the timing of this is that we are introducing the resolution tonight. It will be tabled for the planning commission to be able to look at it, and their next meeting is actually next Thursday. They can choose to make a recommendation to approve this ordinance, amend this ordinance, or reject this ordinance. You're not bound to any of those recommendations. You're still entitled to do this. You just have to get some input from the planning commission for that. But with that said, this is all work in this document that the Planning Commission has been working on over the last couple of years, and more intensively over the last couple of weeks. So this is set up for us to have a public hearing, just like we did on the zoning code. I can advertise it in the newspaper to start the clock rolling on the public hearing. This is set up that we could have the public hearing at our next town meeting on May 23rd to get these changes in the books here. So let me get to some of the crux of this. the first change, if you go to page 2 under section 1, this is where it's talking about the first article. And the article basically has a title of introduction, and it has some subsections titled purpose, intent, and short title and jurisdiction and interpretation. Basically what we're doing is we're keeping the title of the article in place, but we're eliminating all of those subsections and rewording them to read one a little bit more differently, keeping it up to speed with our other codes and how they're structured, modernizing it for some of the things we need to be addressing, and in some cases having essentially the same language but putting it in a different order. So I'm not going to cover all these items, but to be consistent with our other ordinances, the title of this document would be changed from Rising Sun subdivision regulations to the Town of Rising Sun Land Development and Subdivision Code. And I'll explain to you for a second why I'm suggesting that. The legislative authority that used to say under Article 66B of the state law, we all know that was changed many, many years ago, so we're bringing it up to speed with the new state guidelines. The scope here, this is basically a rewording of, and I'll read it so people that are online can understand what the subdivision code does. These regulations of this code are designed to implement the Town of Rising Sun's comprehensive plan to facilitate adequate and coordinated provisions for transportation, water, sewage, stormwater management, grading and soil erosion, schools, parks, playgrounds, and other public requirements to preserve natural features such as stands of trees, streams, and other significant environmental features, and in general to facilitate the orderly, coordinated, efficient, compatible, and harmonious land development of the Town of Rising Sun. For those that have been here for a while, that statement right there is exactly what didn't happen in the early 2000s, any kind of harmonious growth and taking into account those other issues. The intent and purpose, you can read that, and this will all be available to the public. The jurisdiction is basically just saying that this code only applies to the incorporated area or limits of the Town of Rising Sun. Our planning commission only has jurisdiction in the incorporated limits of the Town of Rising Sun, not outside of the town. So anyone who doesn't live in the Town of Rising Sun is not regulated by this code, although you are regulated by a similar code in Cecil County. The definitions, and this is where I'd like to bring to your attention some of the more salient changes of what we're trying to do. If I'm gonna go to page 5 here, and this is going to be a refresher for some folks that have heard some language in the past. Adequate public facilities and developers' rights and responsibilities. Those are two things that should have been in place when the town developed back in the early 2000s. And when you see adequate public facilities agreement, this is where, if applicable, and there's a whole other information related to when it's applicable or not, but basically an adequate public facilities agreement is an agreement between a developer and the town that binds the developer to either furnish, finance, or provide a prorated share of the projected cost of services and facilities, adequate public facilities that have been determined to be lacking in capacity or in need of improvement or expansion. Let me take you back for a second, Commissioner Pearson, because you were on the Sewer and Water Commission at that time. If you remember, we were meeting with Mr. Donahue, and we were doing the impact studies.
Right.
And if you remember at that time, when you're talking about the same development now that was potentially back then, we need an additional water tower. We need additional capacity at the sewer plant. We need additional water lines, a host of things that have to be paid for down the road. And the goal is not to have our existing residents have to pay for those things when they're simply only needed for the development that's coming forward. And if you remember when they did that original study, they came back and said the impact fee should have been like $35,000 per EDU to cover all that stuff, which would have made it really cost prohibitive for any type of development. And we all know why development, good development, is important for the community, because we have a lot of bills to pay as a result of our failing water and wastewater systems. So we got to find a happy medium of development. But we need to make sure that our existing property owners are not paying for the things that are needed. So that's what an adequate public facilities ordinance does. When you're looking at the land development process, and there are people here that currently serve on the Planning Commission or did in the past, you know that typically land development applications are divided among either a minor subdivision or a major subdivision. But there are lots of things that can happen regarding land development that need to be reviewed and addressed. A couple of those are things like lot consolidation, where you're taking two properties. Let's say you have two 10-acre pieces of property that's under the same ownership, maybe not. And the property owners agree to merge the two properties into one property. That's a lot consolidation. That's sort of an elementary process that, as long as it complies with zoning code regulations, you don't really need to go through a planning commission, because there's really not a whole lot to address. Another one is lot line adjustment. You could have two lots. One is 10,000 square feet. The other one is 15, or let's say 20,000 square feet. For whatever reason, you own both lots, but you want to adjust that line to change the sizes of the two lots, you can do that. Again, there's not a whole lot to it. So a lot line adjustment is a minor thing. The other thing that's a minor thing, and we had this with the Knutson property, and our existing land development code infers that it can be done this way, but we wanted to strengthen the language. And what that was is Knutson had a very large farm. He wanted to carve off a 1-acre piece of property for his daughter to build a house. Well, building a house is primarily covered under the building permit, and there isn't a whole lot of land development principles that you really need to be focused on when you talk about what the Planning Commission focuses on. So a subdivision and development of a one single-family residence and accessory building is not something that doesn't necessarily have to go through the Planning Commission. So what I'm getting at here is we've added an additional layer of how we will handle land development activities that don't need to go before the Planning Commission. And they would be called administrative subdivision and single lot development review. And what that means is applications would be sent to the town staff and the town engineer, and we would make sure that it complies with the subdivision code on the minor things that need to be complied with, and then the zoning code, instead of having it go through the Planning Commission process. So that will make it a lot easier for someone who's just looking to build a single-family home, or just looking to do a lot line adjustment or consolidation. But here's another layer that we could do, and I would ask you to think about this. There are some construction projects regarding commercial, and let's just take the one we always facetiously love in this community, Dollar Generals, because they seem to pop up all over the place. But a question can be raised as whether or not a single building, in all cases a commercial business, necessarily has to go before the Planning Commission, because in many cases they're nothing more than a very large house that's being built. They don't have a private road going into them, they have a driveway. So some communities will carve out smaller commercial projects and have them go through an administrative process. So what I'm suggesting here in this language here is that the development of land and I'm looking at item 4, the development of land or construction directed towards the occupancy of such land or the occupancy of any building, building structure, or structures thereon, or on any parcel thereof by no more than one business, professional business, personal service, or industrial establishment, or construction and undertaking for any buildings other than a single-family dwelling with less than 10,000 or more square feet of total gross floor area that does not significantly change the use type, intensity of use, or density of the development, and located on undeveloped and not previously approved subdivision parcels where no new streets or other public improvements are involved. This shall include developments and subdivisions whose previous approvals were declared null and void under the town's land development sunset provision. There's a lot to unpack here. Basically what I'm suggesting is if somebody has a piece of land and they want to develop it and they want to put 2 commercial buildings on it, it can't go through the administrative review. It gets kicked up to a minor subdivision at that point because it's 2 buildings, not 1 building. In addition, if anybody's just building a single building of under 10,000 square feet, it's really closely related to the building permit process. So that's the other idea of not having it go through the minor subdivision process if it's under 10,000 square feet. The other item is that if it is not changing the use type, in other words, somebody who's doing an office building and they propose to build a building of under 10,000 square feet, and for whatever reason they decided to tear that building down and build another building, they can't go from an office to a light industrial. Even though they're under 10,000 square feet, we want the planning commission to be able to get their eyes and ears on that intensity, increase of intensity of the use. The other thing in here is that if you have a piece of property that was part of a subdivision in the past, and let's just say that subdivision was for, regardless of what size building it was, or what type of use, it was approved before, but nothing ever got commenced, it never started. And so that's where the clause in here says that if it is declared null and void under our sunset provisions, meaning we have dealt here with developments from the late 1990s that they have been able to come in and build to those pre-existing conditions to some degree because the project was approved back in the 90s. And what's commonly done, like any contract agreement you might be familiar with, there's a sunset provision. You have to do the following before this amount of time or the agreement goes away. And so that's why you see the sunset provision in there. Another thing that triggers development and land development is when you're doing, and item number 5 covers that, when you're doing things such as putting in a new driveway or road access, legally dumping, that could be a junkyard, a dump, extraction of materials, dredging, grading, paving, storage of materials or equipment, green energy projects, land excavation, land clearing, land improvement, landfill operations, or any combination thereof is described under development below that are limited to no more than 20,000 square feet of developed or improved area. So basically what I'm saying here is that there are certain land activities that technically by code trigger a subdivision, fall under the definition of a subdivision. We're going to talk about that in a second. Land development and subdivision are commonly referred to as the same thing. I believe that gets a little bit confusing, so I've divided out development and subdivision as a definition for development, and a subdivision is required when you are doing development. It gets really convoluted, but I pulled that apart for that reason. So in this scenario, what this is saying is that if somebody were putting in green energy projects, whether it be thermal, solar, and they're doing it on the ground, and they want to do a project that is less than 20,000 square feet, it can go through the administrative review process. But if the dredging or land clearing, you guys remember a couple years ago, I'm not going to say the name, Dave, I know you remember, up on Red Pump Road, the individual who went in there and cleared all that wooded area out of there, if that was over 20,000 square feet, all that clearing is supposed to be reviewed, but that could be reviewed under this administrative review process. So that's what the 20,000 square feet is. The other stuff I'm going to skip past is here we mentioned developers' rights and responsibility agreements. That's another thing that should have been in place back in the day, but it wasn't. And basically what a DRRA is that some developments can take a long period of time to materialize for a lot of different reasons. And a developer can protect their development interest by essentially, by paying a fee and services, can basically have their project approved without having to worry about radical changes to codes or nuances that could make the financing that they got previously from a bank all become very difficult because they got to go back to get more money for something that could have been protected under a developer's rights and responsibilities agreement. And so this agreement basically says, in exchange for the developer doing this, we will do the following. And so it's basically an agreement. And that also heads off the sunset provision, but they're dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So the DRRA would be reviewed by the town attorney and the staff, and recommendations would be made to the governing body that approves this to make sure that the DRRA is in the town's best interest. The other definition that I want to make sure you understand is, believe it or not, and I've asked this question of a variety of different entities, including our town engineer that handles development for other communities. You can say to you, when you think of the definition of a subdivision, and when you think about our ordinance always being called the subdivision regulations, that gives you the illusion that you're taking something bigger and dividing it into multiple components. But that's not the only thing that's regulated by a subdivision regulation. We just got done talking about land activities that are also regulated. So that's the reason why, to avoid confusion, I'm recommending the code be renamed Subdivision and Land Development Code, and we have a separate definition of development. Because what I'm saying to you is that in other communities, somebody could come in to clear a whole lot of land, of trees, and we're going to tell them we have to get a subdivision approval from the planning commission. And that creates a discussion of, well, wait a minute, I'm not subdividing anything, I'm only doing land clearing. So I think this is a better way to cover those concepts to avoid confusion down the road. I think everything else sort of stands on its own. It's all, well, here's a public works agreement. We've all been burned by those in the past, where the public works agreement was supposed to set aside a certain amount of money that the town could draw upon to finish certain aspects of a development. But because the previous town attorney was the developer and the attorney, the agreements were written for the benefit of the developer. So we're just revisiting the whole concept of a public works public works agreement. And then you get into, and here, remember I just talked about the definition of development? A lot of subdivision codes, and I'm on page 8, have the definition of a subdivision, but nowhere in there does it really talk about the land activities that can take place that would require it to come through the subdivision regulation. So again, I'm just cleaning that up. Now we get into the minor subdivision. And most of you guys are familiar with this. we're basically keeping the same concepts, but items 4 and 5 are addressing the above and beyond what can be covered by the administrative development and single lot development. So remember when I talked about you could create one business under an administrative review? This is basically saying if you're going to create two businesses, then it's a minor subdivision. If you're doing land development activities of, or if you're building a building larger than 10,000 square feet, but less than 20,000 square feet, that becomes a minor subdivision. And if you're doing land activities in excess of 20,000, but less than 100,000, then that becomes a minor subdivision. And then a major subdivision is just taking it one step further and saying, if you're building 3 or more businesses, that becomes a major subdivision. If you're constructing a building larger than 20,000 square feet, it's a major subdivision. And if you're doing land activities between that are going to be over, I need to make a change on that, are going to be over 100,000 square feet, then that will be a major subdivision. So we're ratcheting it up as we go along here. The one thing I want to bring to your attention when you go back to item number 1 in the minor subdivision, our zoning code says a minor subdivision is 3 lots or less. Our subdivision code says 4 lots or less. I'm recommending that we keep the 4 lots or less because it's more closely related to what the county does and other communities. There's a lot, I think the county is a much larger number. I think it might be 5 or a minor subdivision is 5. Some other communities I looked at are 4 and 5. My point is I think 3 is too excessive there. So I'm recommending that we stay with the 4 or fewer residential lots as a minor subdivision. So that concludes that ordinance. Again, this would sit until our next public hearing. What I would ask is if the board likes these concepts, you can direct me to take this before the planning commission to get their recommendations, and you can also direct me to place an advertisement so this could be considered at a public hearing at our next town meeting.
Thank you, Town Administrator. Ordinance 2023-05, which is the plan submittal sequence. Do you have that?
I guess I'm asking if you want to move forward
Need to
through
make
it.
a motion.
Can I get a motion to move forward with,
I make a motion, we move forward with ordinance 2023-4 to send it to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
So moved. For a second?
any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mayor, I'm now ready for 05. These are going to be a lot easier because this is more straightforward. All the concepts are the same in terms of needing to go before the planning commission and holding a public hearing upon getting recommendations. This ordinance here is 2023-05, an ordinance of the Town of Rising Sun, Cecil County, Maryland, amending the general laws of the Town of Rising Sun by amending and adding language to Chapter 11 titled Rising Sun Subdivision Regulations for the purposes of outlining the sequence of plan submittals for the review and approval of any development plans and to repeal any and all other ordinances and parts of the ordinances in conflict. So when you jump down to the First Amendment under Section 1 on page 2, the Code of Ordinances for the Town of Rising Sun contains Chapter 11 titled Rising Sun Subdivision Regulations, Article 4 titled Procedure, Section 11-400 titled Introduction, Section 11-401 titled Purpose, and Sections 11-402 through Sections 11-413. The First Amendment is really just looking to address some of the first items. So under procedure, we are talking about changing the article name from procedure to plan submittal stages and sequence. And then section 11-400 introduction would basically, what this is basically saying is the procedures hereinafter specified provide not only for the conditional approval of a concept preliminary plat and approval of a final plat for both minor and major subdivisions, but it also provides for opportunities for the developer to appear before the planning commission as part of an administrative technical review, ATR phase, and a sketch plan review, SPR phase, both at the discretion of the applicant. Although the ATR and SPR phases are optional to the applicant and are not a prerequisite to the approval of the final plat, these optional phases are strongly recommended because it provides the developer with an opportunity to secure guidance on how to best approach their land development project, resolve problems early in the proceedings, and to make necessary modifications and revisions prior to incurring the expense of preparing a concept, preliminary, and final plat. The code also provides for developers with smaller, less detailed projects with limited density and intensity of use to submit their projects for review and approval as part of the internal administrative review process and as defined in Article 2 of this document. So basically what this is saying is that Section 11-401 is the next amendment, and that's being retitled Submittal Stages and Sequence. You can read that, but basically what we're doing is we're creating that administrative subdivision review and single lot development. We talked about that in the previous ordinance of how we're going to get those in more of an administrative review because they're not as substantial as something that would be a minor or major subdivision. So this is basically just recreating the language that I read to you in the previous definition, but we need to incorporate that phase of the submittal process in this document. So that's what this first item is doing under 11-401. It's creating a Part A. And then a Part 2, minor and major subdivisions. The development of minor and major subdivisions as defined in Article 2 in the Town of Rising Sun shall be submitted for review, comment, and approval to include all required information as set forth in Appendix A of this code in the following stages. So let me back up. I think you've heard me say this in the last couple of meetings when we talked about doing this. We clearly got burned by developers in the past, but I think that a good developer, and I've always said this, is going to spend $750,000 in the land development process in terms of getting the plans and everything they need to do in the engineering. They're going to be upwards of $750,000. They will do just about anything you want within reason if you lay the breadcrumbs out enough for them to follow along and not have any hidden surprises. And that's our goal in all of these revisions, is to make this document efficient, but hold the line on what's important to our community and make sure that these developers are held accountable for it. But we're not suggesting anything that good developers are not used to dealing with in other communities that they develop in. And we are getting a lot of developers from other areas coming because our community is very attractive to live in with the schools, the housing values, and the low crime. And so what we're basically doing is creating these 5 stages of the submittal process. One would be the administrative technical review. That's at the pleasure of the developer. So let's say a developer has a piece of land and they want to come in and say, what would you think if I did the following? It's a very informal, come in before the planning commission and bounce the ideas off them. And the planning commission could say, I don't like that, go back to the drawing board. Or they could say, we like that, but would you consider doing the following things? Now when they start to spend their money to take it to the next phase, they know, they're armed with information of what is going to be of interest to the community. The next item, Stage B, is also at the pleasure of the developer. Augie and Dave, having been on the planning commission in the past, you know the tentative sketch plan was always a requirement, but it never mentioned the concept plan. We are basically moving tentative sketch plan back down to the pleasure of the developer. And now at this point, you're basically getting a bird's eye view of what's gonna be proposed, where the roads are gonna be, some open space, where some park and recreational features are gonna be, and they can say, this not only is my idea, but this is how it's gonna look. Again, it enables the planning commission to be able to advise the applicant on how to proceed. If they don't wanna realize the benefit of that good information, they can go write the concept plan, which is required, preliminary plan, which is required, and final plan that is required. And then, so that's just laying the groundwork for the plan submittal process. And then Amendment 3 is basically just taking all of the sections, subsections that would not change, but because I created a new subsection, I had to renumber them going backwards, or going forward. So that is the summary of ordinance 2023-05. Again, if this is something that you're interested in, I would ask that you direct me to proceed with the public hearing and getting it before the planning commission.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to direct the town administrator to take it before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Any discussion? None? All in favor?
Aye.
Ordinance 2023-06, plan submittal checklist. Town administrator, do you have that?
Yes, so this one's even shorter. You got all the heavy lifting out at the beginning. So what you have here is at the back of our subdivision code, and again, part of our cross to bear in the past is that our zoning code and our subdivision code was not very well constructed, and it contradicted itself. So in our zoning code, we have a list of what is required for minor and major subdivisions that didn't really match what we had in our subdivision regulations. So our intent is going to be to eliminate it out of the zoning code and just have it in the subdivision code. And what this basically is doing is that if you go to, and I'm going to turn this around so everybody can see it on the screen. So in Appendix A, you're now going to recognize these columns that I talked about. The admin subdivision and single lot development, the administrative technical review, the sketch plan for a minor subdivision, concept for a minor subdivision, preliminary for a minor subdivision, final for a final subdivision, and then sketch, concept, preliminary, and final matched again for a major subdivision. So when somebody is submitting plans to be reviewed, there are roughly, I think, about 62 items that we have on the list right now that vary from, you know, who the owner is, who the engineer is, the survey, the meets and bounds, the landscape plan, the stormwater management approval, everything that's involved and is needed for the town to approve a final plan is represented by checks in the column of when they are required and when they are not. And there are some things, in other words, if a developer is going to come in with a sketch plan, you don't want to overburden that with a whole bunch of other requirements that are going to be picked up in these concept, preliminary, and final. Otherwise, there'd be no reason for a developer to pursue the sketch plan, and it sort of defeats that purpose. Because once a developer commits to the concept plan, they have to spend a whole heck of a lot of information for that concept plan and the preliminary and the final. So allowing them to go through the sketch, but not requiring as much information makes it more reasonable to pursue the that sketch plan process. So all we basically did here is we are eliminating the current Appendix X, Appendix A in the subdivision code, and replacing it with this new Appendix A. At the very end of it, and this is something that we're taking into account, the town's venture into stormwater management, is that we're making it clear that the stormwater management approval will run concurrent with the land development approval, which is not uncommon. But here's what could happen in the past. The town of Rising Sun could have been going through the sketch plan, preliminary and final, but not really knowing where the stormwater management plan was. And you could inadvertently be saying, well, yeah, the concept plan looks good to me, but the county in the stormwater review had big issues with the stormwater management review, and then it gets out of sequence. And then you're asked to review a preliminary plan approval that was based upon your concept plan, but it no longer jives with what the county was requiring under the stormwater management review. So you want to make sure these truly run concurrent. So this is basically just saying that if you come before the planning commission for concept plan approval, you have to have the concept stormwater management plan already approved. And so it runs the when you before the commission on preliminary, you have to have the preliminary stormwater management plan approved, and before you can get final, you have to have the final stormwater management plan. That's going to negate a lot of confusion and a lot of approvals with conditions that just get really complicated. And then above that, you see where we're talking about if you're going to have an adequate public facilities agreement or a developer's rights and responsibilities agreement, we're talking about when they have to be executed as part of the process. So that concludes that ordinance. Again, if you're interested in this, I would ask that you direct me to proceed forward.
Can I get a motion to approve for the town administrator to send ordinance 2023-06, the plan submittal checklist, to the planning commission?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Infrastructure expansion and upgrade fees, town administrator.
I've been talking to you folks about this. I was gonna do an ordinance for tonight, but there were a couple loopholes that we wanted to sort out. And that, remember when I was speaking to Commissioner Pearson about the original impact study that said we needed like $35,000 per connection to deal with the stuff that needs to be built in order to have new development. So we're talking about having an infrastructure expansion and upgrade fees that will not be charged like an impact fee on the front end, but they will be charged as a front footage assessment on every property that is being built. And that new property owner will be able to pay that infrastructure and expansion upgrade fee over a 10-year period. Let's think about the alternative of that. If we put it on the developer's not going to pocket that. He's going to pass it along to the new buyer. And if we want to have good home construction that has good values, it's not going to make sense to have basically $32,000 of impact fees on top of the purchase price of the house. So by doing it this way, the new property owner will be able to buy into a good house. It will bring the property values up of all the existing properties in town per se, which is great economic benefit to the existing property owners, but it will allow the property owners in the future that are truly causing these additional monies for infrastructure, they will be the ones that will pay for that over a 10-year period. So hopefully at the next town meeting, I'll have what that looks like. I will say this for the benefit of Commissioner Pearson, we're still not in a position to deal with all of the items that were originally spoken about in that original impact fee. Some of those can be resolved if we get the BRIC funding grant money. The MS4, we're talking about having to come up with $1.75 million of MS4 stuff. We can't pick up that charge in here because it would just get to the point where development is just too cost prohibitive, and we'll be sitting here like we did over the last 15 years with the same number of taxable properties with no way to raise revenue to pay for expenses other than to raise the taxes, and that's not what we want to do. So all this is designed to bring more users and more taxpayers into the system to keep the tax rate and user rates at a level for existing property owners. So we'll hopefully be looking at that at our next meeting.
Thank you, Town Administrator. Moving forward to citizens' input. Would anyone like to speak this evening? Anyone? Into staff reports, Town Administrator.
There's just two things I need to bring to your attention. Number one, Tom Goebel, who was a member of our planning commission, has submitted a resignation from the planning commission because for health reasons he's unable to continue in that role. So you do have a vacancy. I also, at our last two planning commission meetings ago, Commissioner Joanne Osborne submitted a verbal resignation from the planning commission. So you actually have two vacancies on the planning commission, which I think we talked about it at the last meeting. I have a third member who's just barely hanging on because of work requirements. If we can fill those positions in a timely manner with some good people, it'll be very beneficial because all this stuff we're doing in our land development code here to try to protect the town could all go out the window if we can't meet our legal obligation to hold planning commission meetings. So we've got to try to fill those positions. The last item I have for you real quick, we had previously talked about adopting the constant yield tax rate at tonight's meeting. We still have time, and we've just Judy and I have made a decision to hold up on that because as I've talked about before, we have cost increase going up. I previously notified you of our trash bid more than doubling the cost of trash removal in the town. Our current real estate tax rate cannot support that. So we're trying to find creative ways, and we have some good options to try to bring that projected cost down to a reasonable level. So I don't want us to commit to not raising the constant yield tax rate, which is what we ultimately want to do, but I don't want to have you do that and then something come up where you have to go back on that. So we have time to do that. The budget, generally speaking, we have closed a lot of the gaps, and we think we are going to be able to present to you a balanced budget without raising sewer and water rates any more than the pro forma rate talked about, without raising the debt service tax, and without raising the real estate tax. But I want to emphasize what I've always done in the past. It is getting close. And so we need to address these development pressures in a manner that both benefit the town but do not prove to be a detriment to the town. And all the hard work you've done and the Planning Commission has done with the comprehensive plan and our zoning and land development changes are going to put us in a position to be able to do that going forward. So our goal is to be able to present the preliminary budget to you at the next town meeting on the 23rd.
Thank you, Town
I have
Administrator.
a question, sir. Any update on the parking signs on East Cherry Street?
I think that's something that the chief and I have to get together to finalize. Are we, and I apologize if it skipped by me, are we looking to do a resolution or ordinance?
I believe you
determining-
said we had to come back and do a resolution on
Yes.
an ordinance.
All right, So I'll make sure we get that one for the next meeting.
Okay, Chief?
I'll try to be brief. A couple things. We've received numerous complaints about speeding along Main Street. The officers have been out there quite a bit lately. I'm sorry about that. The officers have been out there quite a bit lately, and we're averaging about 8 to 11 stops per day for various traffic violations, trying to control the speed. With that being said, there's other places in town that I have invited electronic speed monitoring systems to come and review to see if it's something that will help service those areas. So we look forward to some reports from that in the future. Secondly, the body cams that we have been wearing have reached their maturity level. However, when we first purchased them, I had an agreement installed into our contract that we would be getting upgrades at no cost to the town. So we've received those upgrades, and the guys are actually wearing the newer body cameras now. As you see, there was a vehicle that was purchased last year. One of them is close to being obtained from the vendor. The others are still at the mercy of the Ford gods. So we have no idea. It's been over a year since they were ordered. No VIN numbers or anything have been populated, so we have no idea when they may come about. It may reach the point where we have to reach out for other vendors to backfill to see what we can get. So that should be coming soon with one of the vehicles at least. Officer Moore, as I spoke about a while back, has graduated the academy. He was in his what's called a field training period, where he rides with an experienced officer for a minimum of 260 hours. He has completed that. He is out on the street on his own now. We've got to do a swearing in for him at the next town meeting, and he will be, his own individual operating officer. He has a very keen knack for finding things. So he's done remarkable so far with things that seem to just happen around him. And last, Sunfest is June 3rd. We get numerous complaints that we don't notify the citizens of this town about Sunfest. Sunfest is June 3rd. It's the first weekend of June. It happens every year on the first weekend of June. And for those residents that are close by, again, I will be handing you a flyer, as I always do. And that's my report, unless there's questions.
Chief, would those signs out front indicating that Sunfest is June 3rd, would that indicate that Sunfest is June 3rd?
That is part of it. And the notices that are put on cars.
I think our agenda here has it listed also.
Okay.
Let's make sure.
Town
the water
Attorney,
bill.
do you have a report this evening?
I do. Good evening, everyone. We're going to talk later in a closed session. I'm going to ask that you go into closed executive session so we can talk about some of the finer details of this legal report. But the one issue I want to let you know is that the matter with 16 Main Street is moving forward. We gave the required notice by writing, and the advertisements will be run. We created the advertisements that have to go in the paper for the staff to run, and so they're going to take care of that. And the planned sale date is June 2nd, Friday, June 2nd in the morning. So that process is moving forward. We haven't really heard anything more from the county, so we assume that we're all in concert together and doing what you have directed. If there's
Thank you, Jay.
questions,
Any
I think-
questions for Jay? Thanks, Jay.
All right.
All right, Assistant Town Administrator.
There's lots of things that, we could talk about. One of the things that we are working on is working with our sewer plant and looking at making sure that we have preventive maintenance, things like that under control. Looking forward to finishing budget. I do want to say that I'm very proud of our staff. We did the fishing derby. That we had 25 fisher people, had a wonderful morning with them. And other than that, just business as usual.
Thank you. Moving forward into the mayor's report, I hosted a mental health roundtable with Lieutenant Governor Miller at Rising Sun High School. It was great. A lot of students and CCPS leadership came, as well as Chief Peterson and Sheriff Scott Adams. It was great to hear from the students and the struggles that they are facing, and we look forward to having more conversations about mental health. Senior banners. The fundraiser for our 2023 senior class banners is live. It's on our Facebook site. Anyone can donate to that fundraiser. We will again feature all of our Rising Sun High School senior class on banners throughout our community. Those will be going up near the end of May. I also attended a Board of Directors Summit at College Park along with Commissioner Warnick to represent the town of Rising Sun, as well as being a at-large member of the MML Board of Directors. Myself and the Board of Commissioners attended the 2022 Rising Community Fire Company of Rising Sun Fire Banquet, where we presented a check collectively for $20,000 to the Community Fire Company. We certainly thank them for their service to our community. I also attended today the essay winners of the Mayor's Essay Contest for this year in Annapolis. It was hosted by Governor Wes Moore. It was great. One of the nominees that actually won was one of the schools that I spoke to, which was the Tome School. The Tome School has actually won the last 7 years, so that's pretty impressive. Congratulations to Maggie for winning this year. This week is actually Teacher Appreciation Week. Myself and Chief Peterson will be going to Rising Sun Middle School and Rising Sun High School to drop breakfast off to the teachers and to thank them for all that they do for our community. If you check out Lieutenant Governor Miller's Facebook site and her Instagram, it actually features Brianna Souter, who is the Cecil County Schools Teacher of the Year. She also teaches art at Rising Sun High School. That is the end of my report. Going into Commissioner comments, Commissioner Braun,
I have no report.
Commissioner Kleiner,
No report.
Commissioner Pearson.
You didn't think you were gonna get off that easy, did you? Okay. At the request of the fire company, I'm asked to bring up a subject for our employees. We have two employees, Grant and Billy, who are members of the fire company. The chief, Blakely, has asked if the town would consider allowing them during the workday for serious calls to be able to attend the fire company to get apparatus out. Unfortunately, being in an all-volunteer area, this is kind of like a major request. I'm like to hear any thoughts on it and all. I know in other communities that it's allowed to happen. The problem is the old day of the farmer jumping off the tractor and coming in and jumping on the fire engine are gone. There's been times during the day when they've had serious calls where they did not have enough bodies to get out because people are working. So I asked the town administrator, which direction how do I go about this, putting it, getting more information on it, or?
At the banquet, Chief Blakely had approached me about it. And like you, having been in the volunteer fire service, in previous places that I worked, I was an employee that was able to respond to fires. And so I don't think it's an unreasonable request. However, there's always that magic number. We're going to have to figure it out internally, because it's that magic number of, like, when we're doing street projects, you got two guys working in the hole, you got two guys that have to flag. So what does that mean? We'll have to figure those things out.
There would have to be limitations also. I'm not belittling any call,
Yeah,
but a call for a alarm box versus a call for a dwelling fire or a commercial dwelling fire they're not in the same category.
Yeah.
And you and
agreed.
I both understand that.
Right. So I think that, along with Judy, who's basically, oversees the Public Works Department, we'll have to put in some measures to protect the interest of everybody. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the fire company, I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. The fire company could be responding to properties within the town of Rising Sun, but they could be responding to properties well outside the town of Rising Sun. So we're just gonna have to figure out how to do it, but I think it can be done. We're just gonna have to be creative, and Matt, committed to me to, understanding that and working with us on that. So Judy and I will put our heads together and come up with, some kind of policy on that. Is that something you guys
I'm fine with
want
it,
to
the concept.
approve that policy, or just have us make the if you want us to make the policy and make it happen, we'll make it happen.
Well,
I think we should know what the policy
Okay.
Yeah.
is.
I do too.
As long as we're comfortable with it, then I think that we'll move forward. But
Okay.
let you guys get together, come up with the policy, and get back with us on it.
Okay.
Is that okay?
that's fine.
Like, do we have any idea of frequency, Augie, like,
It's not a frequent thing,
okay,
okay? It's not a daily thing, if that's we're fortunate in that it's sporadic, but we're also unfortunate that we don't have enough people. And this is not just a problem with Rising Sun. Throughout the county and the area, the volunteer fire departments do not have people volunteering to do this. So,
Commissioner Pearson, just not to belabor the subject, but you raised something that piqued my curiosity, is that under the scenario of it not being very frequent, and Judy, just for your benefit, think of how many times we hear the fire trucks go by here. It can be sometimes several times a day. So we'll have to figure out, is this gonna be something where we're just gonna say, you listen to the call and go, or are we gonna wait for a call from the fire company to say, we're not getting anybody out, we need your help?
I
So-
think that's something we'll have to work on.
Right,
I do not want it to be a carte blanche policy, okay? I only want it to be for by all definitions, serious calls,
right,
okay?
right.
You know,
Out of curiosity, would that include the EMS response? Do they have a driver for EMS?
Well, that would be ambulance only, because EMS is handled by the county.
Well,
yeah,
the
yeah,
ambulance only.
EMS would be different.
Okay,
This would only be suppression.
okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's it.
All right, Commissioner Warnick?
So I have, one update, or I guess sort of, well, we'll call it one big update. So in Veterans Park, the Eagle Scout project is proceeding. I met with them before the meeting tonight. A few weeks ago, our guys in Public Works went down and did some work down there, prep work, and they will be, it looks like Saturday, working on the trail from the bridge near the basketball courts into the entry point into the woods to get that trail put in place. So I'm going to talk to Judy after this about some minor prep work we may need to assist with. So it looks like, we're finally, the ground's firm enough that they can go down and do it, and everything's going to get rolling this weekend.
Sounds good. Thank you, Commissioner Warnick.
Thank you.
You can see on the agenda upcoming Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission, as well as upcoming town events and holidays, trash, recycling, and yard waste schedule. I need to get a motion to go in an executive session to get a legal update from our town attorney. Could I get a motion for that?
Make a motion that we go into executive meeting.
All right, and we'll say in about 10 minutes, we'll proceed into the executive meeting.
Second.
who seconded, I didn't hear.
Dave
Second.
seconded.
Are you guys coming back here?
No.
No.
All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.